Hello everyone. This is the third part of the lecture of red and white lesions of the oral mucosa, which will be dealt together by Dr. Ajay and myself. And in this lecture series, we will be again looking at some of the most important red and white lesions. The learning outcomes that we have discussed remain the same, is to categorize the causes of red and white lesions as well as to differentiate them clinico-pathologically. Again, we'll be looking at the oral potentially malignant disorders a little bit in detail this time, and we would look at some of these disorders that we have listed out here, and also in detail about their differential diagnosis and management along with histopathology. When it comes to the classification, as discussed in the previous lecture, we have been talking about classifying them based on Burkitt's classification given in the oral medicine textbook, based on etiology, which classifies them as infections, potentially malignant disorders, immunopathologic diseases, allergic reactions, toxic reactions, reactions to mechanical trauma, and other lesions. So let us first look at potentially malignant disorders, which could manifest as red or white lesions in the oral cavity, or a combination of mixed red and white lesions in the oral cavity. Under this subheading, we'll be looking at in detail at oral leukoplakia, oral erythroplakia, as well as oral submucous fibrosis. So let's start with oral leukoplakia. You're very familiar with oral leukoplakia as a predominantly white lesion of the oral mucosa that cannot be characterized as any other definable oral lesion. Having said that, sometimes the diagnosis or clinical diagnosis of oral leukoplakia can be quite challenging, as for novice practitioners or dental students, it might mimic other lesions and you may tend to either overlook it, miss it, or probably diagnose it and yet not be able to convince the patient to be on regular follow-up. The reason why I'm talking about that is because oral leukoplakia is a potentially malignant disorder with a global prevalence of 2.6%. Now this looks like a very small number, but then it is that number that we want to catch early so that they don't turn out to become malignant, and we don't want to see many patients coming back with malignant lesions, right? So it's of utmost importance that you catch these and treat these patients early. So generally the male predilection is higher than female, and most of the patients are over 50 years of age. When it comes to site, in case of non-smokers, the most common site is the border of the tongue. We don't really know the reason why specifically it is this lesion. This lesion is seen in this particular area. And when the lesion is seen in any patient, either smoker or non-smoker, on the floor of the mouth, lateral border of the tongue, it carries a high risk. And this high risk is because of high malignant transformation rate seen in these particular areas. Now the reason could be because of blood supply. But what is to be importantly noted is when a lesion is seen in these areas, it should be immediately biopsied and taken care of. There are different types of clinical classifications of oral leukoplakia. The homogeneous one, which appears like cracked mud; non-homogeneous, also called as erythroleukoplakia, which I find is a very confusing terminology. So more preferred and easier to remember one would be the word speckled leukoplakia. The reason why we use the word speckled is because it could be nodular, papillary, exophytic, or simply a mixture of red and white. And the third one is a proliferative verrucous leukoplakia, PVL, which is a more aggressive form of leukoplakia, having a higher malignancy rate and recurrence rate. This is homogeneous leukoplakia. You will notice that there is a white lesion here, which is non-scrapable, and having this crack-like appearance, which is what is similar to or considered as cracked mud appearance. Now, if you observe this first picture here, you will notice that there are thinner areas of the lesion and thicker areas of the lesion. Now, does that mean that the thinner area is having lesser rate of malignant transformation and the thicker one? Well, you can say so. If this thicker one becomes further thicker and exophytic, then definitely it would move on to become a non-homogeneous type.
The non-homogeneous leukoplakia again may generally arise from a homogeneous variety, where you're seeing a white area and along with it a mixed red and white area. Now again, these are non-scrapable. You also see a pigmented variant here, but this is less problematic than this one circled in yellow, and hence this area should be the one where the biopsy should be taken from. Similarly, on the commissure area here also you're seeing a more extensive red and white mixed lesion, which is looking very suspicious and must be biopsied instantly. The PVL is more exophytic. It is considered could be a precursor variant of the verrucous carcinoma. And these are known to be very notorious because of aggressive nature, widespread and recurrence rate. Now in this picture of the palette, you will notice that there is a thick exophytic area, there is a thinner area, and of course there is a red and white mixed area as well. The clinical features of proliferative verrucous leukoplakia are the first of all the verrucous papillary projections, which you can see here in this picture that is posted here. They are more aggressive, have a high recurrence rate and predilection for older women, and lower gingiva. So this image is also that of lower gingiva and have a high malignant potential. The case that we had discussed in the beginning of the chapter is this patient who is a 45-year-old female who's undergone recent knee joint replacement and reports with asymptomatic white lesions that are non-scrapable, thick and irregular. So this patient is one of our cases, and when we had actually done a biopsy for this area, we had given a clinical diagnosis of proliferative verrucous leukoplakia, and having said that, this lesion, which looks absolutely white and could have been actually missed as fictional keratosis, turned out to be severe dysplasia. On the other hand, erythroplakia is a red lesion of oral mucosa that cannot be characterized as any other definable lesion. The global prevalence is much lesser. It has well demarcated borders and is asymptomatic. This is also a potentially malignant disorder, carrying the highest risk of malignant transformation among all of the pre-malignancies. There is a special form of erythroleukoplakia associated with reverse smoking of chutta. This is an example, which is restricted to some certain tribes in southern India, where they place the reverse end of the smoking, the reverse of the smoking end, burning end in the mouth, and hence obviously because of heat and tobacco itself, it leads to lesions which are quite ugly looking and red and velvety. This is a classical appearance of red and white or erythroplakic lesion, extremely velvety and red. So this carries a very high malignant transformational rate, especially the one seen on the tongue over here, or the buccal mucosa and the palate again. Right, so these images are courtesy the International Association of Cancer Research, and it's quite rare to find erythroplakia and give erythroplakia, pure erythroplakia, as a diagnosis in a clinical setting. Even if you are giving this diagnosis, you should be very cautious and very sure that you're looking at an erythroplakic lesion. Mind you, again, let me remind you that majority of the time, even though it is so red, these lesions are asymptomatic. So the patient doesn't perceive pain and hence tends to postpone treatment or evade biopsy. So this again flowchart is very commonly used. This is by Van der Waal, which gives you an idea of how to actually manage oral leukoplakia or manage a white lesion. Now this is a very skeleton framework of the table. If in case you are given a scenario or asked a question, how would you treat or manage white lesion, then you might want to make changes accordingly and modify this table. So let's just look at this table once. Provisional clinical diagnosis, let's say you've come up with a diagnosis of oral leukoplakia, and how do we go about this case? So first of all, you try and eliminate the possible cause. Now what could be the causes? Either ask your patient to quit smoking, or if there is a sharp tooth or any denture that is irritating the area, you would want to eliminate that cause. I mean, when you're suspecting a white lesion, you would obviously look at the surrounding, what are the areas surrounding the white lesion, what are the heart tissue structures surrounding the white lesion, and you would want to look at it, is there any reason for not suspecting leukoplakia. If it looks very clear, like leukoplakia, and you do not get any response even after the patient has not quit, then you know that you're looking at biopsy as a diagnosis, or you have another diagnosis which is not looking like leukoplakia. If the patient has responded well and you know a definable lesion, that means you have probably a frictional keratosis, let's say, you know, and then there is a sharp tooth, might be enameloplasty has solved your problem, and hence you can manage that by doing the enameloplasty or changing the denture, if the denture is the reason why there is a white keratotic area there. On the other hand, if you're not able to find any possible causes, why is the patient having a white lesion? Let's say he or she doesn't smoke, or it's a female patient with no known family history or no known habit history, and you are not sure of what clinical diagnosis to arrive at, or you're sure and have a definite clinical diagnosis, then you would, either ways, you would want to biopsy the patient, right? So when you biopsy the patient, you will come up with either no definable lesion again, that means in favor of leukoplakia, right? And then you will look for either it having dysplasia or no dysplasia, right? On the other hand, you biopsy it and it turns out to be some other definable lesion. That means, for example, it turns out to be lichen planus, or it turns out to be a morsicaceous, that means cheek biting. Then you know how to manage it accordingly. In case you don't have a clinical, histopathological diagnosis for it, it is perfectly falling into your criteria of oral leukoplakia. Again, let me remind you that oral leukoplakia is actually a clinical diagnosis. So on histopathology, you would either call it as keratinization, or areas with hyperkeratosis, or you're seeing dysplasia. When you're seeing dysplasia, again, it is important to note down the type of dysplasia that you're seeing, mild, moderate or severe, and manage this patient based on the type of dysplasia that you're seeing. Of course, follow-up and observation of this patient is very important. Long-term follow-up with 3 to 6 months follow-up if in case it's just mild dysplasia, and then observe, and if in case it ends up being moderate to severe dysplasia, then sometimes you might need to follow up these patients at a 3 to 6 months interval for nearly a lifetime of follow-up. So when we're talking about management of oral leukoplakia and erythroplakias, we should keep in mind that the malignant transformation of oral leukoplakias are about 1 to 20% over a period of 1 to 30 years. So it's very difficult to give answers to your patients that how soon, doctor, how soon will my white lesion become cancer? It's a very difficult question to answer for the clinician. So the only thing that you can tell your patient is that if you quit habit and if you take care of yourself and regularly come for follow-up, then I can probably reduce the speed at which it becomes cancer. But if in case the patient doesn't listen to your advice, then it's very hard to tell how soon that area will become cancerous. There are risk factors which determine how soon or the lesion may turn malignant. We'll look at those risk factors later on in the oral cancer chapter. So in case of erythroplakia, the malignant transformation rate is very high. It's 51%. That means out of the 100 cases of erythroplakia that you see, 51% are sure to become malignancy. So in 60 to 80% of all squamous cell carcinoma cases, they are preceded by an oral potentially malignant disorder. So that is something very important here. That means in 60 to 80% of the cases of all squamous cell carcinomas, had a dentist seen them when they were in the stage of oral potentially malignant disorder, we could have actually saved the patient from turning into oral squamous cell carcinoma, or at least prolong their lifetime by reducing risk factors. So discontinuing habit is still a very, very important part of management. There is smoking, alcohol, betel nut chewing, and important to review these patients 1 to 3 months if they're still following the path of discontinuing the habit, or have they hooked on to the habit again. Biopsy is a very critical tool in managing these lesions. First of all, it's a rule of thumb that within 2 weeks of seeing the case or visualizing the lesion, if there are no signs of subsiding, it is important to take a biopsy for the lesion. There are other reasons why you would think that immediate biopsy is important. Is first of all, if your patient seems non-compliant to follow up, if you think that he or she is not going to turn up, and it is important that you make them realize that this lesion doesn't look very good, then it's important you suggest biopsy, maybe at the first or second visit itself. If you do not have an established etiology, that means you're looking at a patient with no habit history or any other reason to suspect why this patient would have developed a white lesion, and you're still seeing a white lesion, you must do a biopsy. And lastly, if the lesion looks suspicious. Now, the reason why I have underlined this word suspicious is there is a tendency for young doctors to think that everything looks suspicious. But it is where do you draw the line? What is suspicious? What is non-suspicious? Now that comes with clinical experience. So what I would suggest that you look at is, if your patient is having risk factors, you've already waited for 2 weeks, and your patient is probably not following or not falling under any other category, it's important that if you're looking at a red and white lesion, you get the biopsy done as soon as possible in order to at least have a definitive diagnosis in hand, and you know in future how to manage the case. So after you have taken the biopsy, and if the lesion is confirmed to be leukoplakia, whether it is having dysplasia or not having dysplasia, it's important that surgical excision or laser surgery is done, and the patient is kept under follow-up for every 3 to 6 months. At this point, I wanted to introduce you to the term field cancerization, which means this is a form of cancer which is caused by simultaneous genetic instabilities in the epithelium of several extralesional sites that may lead to squamous cell carcinoma. Which means that if a patient is having multiple lesions in the oral cavity, multiple leukoplakias at different sites, this patient becomes more susceptible or has a higher risk of malignant transformation. That is important to watch out for. Moving on, let's look at another white lesion, which is oral submucous fibrosis. Again, you must have dealt with it in detail in oral pathology. Let me give you a more clinical point of view for this topic, right? So these are some pictures of a patient where you can see that there are white marble-like appearance of the lower labial mucosa here, as well as the entire buccal mucosa. This is what we call as marbling. One thing you must very important to observe is, first of all, there will be a lot of clues in the oral cavity to suspect that this patient has been using tobacco, like the stains that you see on the teeth here, classical tobacco or betel nut stains. OSMF is a clinical white lesion with translucent marbled white appearance of mucosa. There is restricted mouth opening and tongue movements. Patient generally has associated tobacco chewing habit, especially what we call as pan, which is betel leaf, and betel nut, which is a Penang nut, tobacco powder, slake lime, and spices. Also available, commercially available flavored tobacco called gutka. This habit is especially predominant in the South Asian subcontinent. That is generally patients who are coming from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and even Taiwan. So there is and Myanmar. There's a high tobacco consumption in these areas, and you will see that many of the patients use these flavored tobaccos or pan. But this is a potentially malignant disorder, and the malignant transformation rate is 7.6%. The differential diagnosis of the clinical appearance could look like amyloidosis, generalized fibromatosis, oral manifestations of scleroderma, or lichen planus, or even anemia, because the pallor or the white area, a whitish appearance, could look like anemia. In fact, many of these patients have coexisting anemia because of poor malnourishment, because they constantly keep chewing these tobacco products, which reduces hunger. And in the process, they eat lesser nutritious food, and develop anemia.
Okay, so moving forward, I would like to add what Dr. Larry just mentioned. So these are images of the etiological factor here. Let me get my pointer on here. So this is what is called as pan. Pan basically is the word which describes a leaf. Here in this case, this is the betel leaf. This piece of brown color material that you see in the leaf that they have put in is the betel nut or the areca nut, the pinang nut. Okay, and these are all the various spices that they put in. They make it into a quid, and these patients chew this for long hours. Okay, the second most important etiological factor, which is been attributed to oral submucous fibrosis or OSMF, is gutka. And these are the various brands that are actually available in various parts of the world. And these are some pictures from Southeast Asia. Show you in the next slide that on one of these packets, if you look right behind, the ingredients that is contained that mentioned is betel nuts, catechu, tobacco, lime permitted spices and flavors, and added flavor. Okay, and there's a clear statutory warning that mentions that chewing of tobacco is injurious to health. Despite that, people still go ahead and use these products. Right. Now, over the years, the pathogenesis of oral submucous fibrosis has been discovered by researchers, and many researchers have been able to attribute the pathways that actually lead to the clinical features that are seen. Here in this case, here I am trying to show you the pathway here. Number one, at the outset, areca nut has been identified as the carcinogen. It is recognized by WHO as a carcinogen, and what it does is when the patients actually chew this areca nut, when it mixes with saliva, it interacts and produces alkaloids, flavonoids, copper, which is present in the gutka, and the fourth component, which is constant chewing that takes place, that leads to this transformation. So we'll look at it one by one. The alkaloids, what they do is that they lead to the release of ergoline, which hydrolyzes and enhances the addition of which causes hydrolysis, which is enhanced by the lime is calcium hydroxide basically, which leads to arachidine formation, pronounced proliferation of the fibroblasts, increased collagen formation, and thus leading to one aspect of the oral submucous fibrosis. So, if you look at the term oral submucous fibrosis, that means there is something that is taking place submucosally, and that change that is taking place is leading to fibrosis. Okay. So, second component, which is the flavonoids, again leads to tannins and catechin production, which inhibit collagenase, which reduce the breakdown of collagen, thus increasing the fibrosis content. Similarly, copper increased concentration of soluble copper in the saliva because of the areca nut, and the components of the gutka lead to upregulation of lysyl oxidase activity, leading to insoluble collagen formation, thus again increasing fibrosis. So what happens when this fibrosis component under the epithelium increases? It leads to juxtaepithelial hyalinization, which I'll show you in the next slide, which leads to vasoobliteration. That means the blood supply reduces, right? This reduction in blood supply leads to depletion of glycogen, muscle fatigue and degeneration, musculofibrosis and scarring, thus leading the patient to pronounced limitation of mouth opening, right? So this reduction in mouth opening, which is taking place because of the fibrosis that is taking place, is happening because of this pathway. So these three components, which are primarily released by the areca nut when it's chewed, lead to fibrosis in this particular mechanism. Now the constant chewing that takes place when they chew the betel quid or the gutka leads to muscular contraction. Okay, basically there's overactivity of the masticatory and perioral musculature, leading to again depletion of glycogen in connective tissue, leading to muscle fatigue and further enhancing the fibrosis. Right. So this is the uh, pathogenesis of oral submucous fibrosis. That is how the fibrosis component is taking place. Now, as has been mentioned, why are we concerned about oral submucous fibrosis? Is because it is described as an oral potentially malignant disorder. So, what does that mean? It means that once a patient develops oral submucous fibrosis, he develops a very high risk of the epithelium undergoing malignant transformation into squamous cell carcinoma. Okay, so with the background, let's see how the histopathology will look when you do a biopsy for these patients. Basically, I have here put in a microscopic slide and also a diagrammatic representation with labeling over here. Okay, we'll take this one by one. So I hope you do recall the normal epithelial tissue, how it would look. Here in this case, we clearly see a flattened epithelium, right, which reduced thickness. So this is called atrophic epithelium, right? This is called atrophic epithelium without rete ridges. Okay, so without rete ridges. So I'm trying to correlate it with what is labeled over here. Right now, the area where the regular normal rete ridges should have been seen, now you are seeing this pale pink color connective tissue. Now this pale pink color connective tissue, that the change in the connective tissue is described as hyalinization. Hyalin means glass-like. Okay, so juxta-epithelial hyalinization means hyalinization or glass-like tissue formation under the epithelium. Okay, so this pink color, pale pink glass-like change is the juxtaepithelial hyalinization. So these are two important features that we see. The third important feature is the increased number of collagen fibers that you see in the connective tissue. Fourth is these blue dots, which is the chronic inflammatory cells, focal inflammatory cells that you see. And the fifth, which is not very clearly seen on this slide but is still visible, is the muscle fiber showing degeneration. Okay, so these are classical pathognomic histopathological features for oral submucous fibrosis.
This is a old clinical staging given by Pinberg. I've chosen to use it here because it still holds good. So, and this is a simpler form of clinical staging which divides it into stage 1, 2 and 3. There have been various other forms of more complex and more detailed staging, but for ease I have chosen Pinberg's classification. So the first stage is stomatitis, where you see erythematous mucosa, vesicles, ulcers, sometimes pigmentation and petechiae. This stage is generally missed by many clinicians because the patient doesn't really present to you at this stage, or it is probably overlooked. The fibrosis or stage 2 is when symptoms start to set in, where you actually see blanching of oral mucosa, and when lesions are a little older, you can palpate fibrous bands in the buccal mucosa and around the mouth opening or lips, like the picture you've seen previously, resulting in a mottled, marble-like appearance of the mucosa because of the vertical thick fibrous bands running in a blanching mucosa. So the word blanching is used. It's a very typical clinical sign seen in oral submucous fibrosis is when you actually press the mucosa with your fingers, you will see the white area spreading wider, and that's what we call as blanching. So specific findings include the following: restriction of mouth opening, which is seen, it is called as trismus, stiff and small tongue, blanched and leathery floor of the mouth, fibrotic and depigmented gingiva, rubbery soft palate with decreased mobility, blanched and atrophic tonsils, sunken bud-like uvula, also called as hockey stick uvula, sinking of the cheeks, not commensurate with age or nutritional status. That means the cheeks look sunken because they're so thick and fibrotic that when the person actually puffs his cheek, they don't even puff out completely because the cheeks have lost their resiliency and suppleness and now are very thick and stiff and fibrous. So that's one of the tests that you ask the patients to do: puff out their cheeks, and you will see that this cheek is actually sunken. The stage 3 is sequelae of OSF, which is either leukoplakia, basically potentially malignant disorders developing in OSMF, and this is seen in about 25% of individuals. Speech and hearing deficits may be there because of fibrosis of the tongue and the eustachian tubes. So this is an example of leukoplakia. If you see, there's a whiter thickened area over here and some few red areas here in this lady who has difficulty in mouth opening and a very narrow oral aperture, which suggests progression of the lesion. Now, treatment of OSMF is very complex. Again, I have just tried to summarize them into these headings. important thing to remember is again asking the patient to quit habit. Now, one thing about treatment of oral submucous fibrosis is, first of all, it's very challenging. Not only challenging for the clinician from the point of view that the lesion is changes that happen are irreversible because of the juxtaepithelial hyalinization and the amount of collagen that is laid down, but also from patient compliance point of view. So many of these patients end up not complying to treatments and are lost to follow up because the treatment and management is long term, lifelong, and sometimes not very successful. So the pharmacological methods of treating would be giving fibrinolytic preparations like hyaluronidase, collagenase, colchicine, steroids, which are anti-inflammatory and reduce fibroblast proliferation and collagen deposition. They can be either topical or injected into the in and around the area where the lesions are seen. Intralesional injections can be given. Placentrix, which is an aqueous extract of human placenta and which stimulates regeneration and recovery. Antioxidants in the form of vitamin E, A and C, and others like lycopene and alpha lipoic acids, pentoxifillin and levamisole. These are all newer drugs which have been tried, and some of them have been really successful for some cases. There are surgical methods or non-pharmacological methods which have been used, like the surgical splitting of the band and trying to open up the oral mucosa by force. But what happens is when you actually surgically do this, sometimes reverse fibrosis or more increased fibrosis can happen. Physiofibrolysis using microwave diathermy and physiotherapy, and laser therapy of the bands. So some of these patients actually in some cases there is success. So it depends from case to case how treatment is instituted for the patient. So now, having an idea of some of the most important red and white lesions, let me just summarize which ones we actually looked at. We looked at infectious lesions like candidiasis, and then we looked at immunological diseases and like lichen planus. We looked at autoimmune disease like SLE. We looked at potentially malignant disorders like leukoplakia and erythroplakia and oral submucous fibrosis. So other than this, there are other cases that we would just look at.
The other red and white lesions that we'll be looking at are some allergic reactions, toxic reactions, reactions to mechanical trauma, and just some which cannot be categorized as any other, just putting them under the heading of other or miscellaneous lesions.
This is a reaction of a patient to dentifrices and chlorhexidine. This is one of our case, in fact, who had a chemical burn which left him with entire oral mucosa being stripped off. You can see that the mucosa is actually having a chemical burn, and then there's a caustic substance which he accidentally swallowed, and he didn't really swallow it, but it was in his oral cavity and then he spit it out. But then by then the substance had already done damage to his oral mucosa. Of course, the patient healed within a few weeks' time. This is reaction to smokeless tobacco, which is also called as tobacco pouch keratosis. Again, we see a lot of these cases in our clinic where you see that the patient uses tobacco and places it in the pouch of the buccal mucosa here, either in the anterior or the posterior part, preferably in the lower buccal mucosa, sometimes even the upper buccal mucosa. They leave it there for the whole day, and the juice of the tobacco, they keep swallowing it, and the tobacco product ends up giving a very white appearance, which is called as tobacco pouch keratosis. At this point in time, this lesion is still considered not a potentially malignant disorder. But when you start seeing changes, let's say this area ends up becoming more thicker or more red and white, then you would want to perform a biopsy in this area, suspecting it to have turned into a potentially malignant disorder, most commonly a leukoplakia. This is smoker's palate. Again, this is an early smoker's palate, or you could say intermediate smoker's palate, and this is the more late smoker's palate. Also depends on what the person is smoking. Either it is cigarette or cigar or different types of cigarette. And then you will see that there are these dotted areas are the minor salivary glands, which the orifices are still patent, and the rest of the area has got keratinized, giving it a whitish gray appearance. Again, let me remind you, smoker's palate is not a potentially malignant disorder. Geographic tongue, now why have we included it here is because of the red and the white appearance, the red in the center and the periphery or annular pattern of white rim around the lesion. This is a benign migratory glossitis, nothing to worry about. The patient generally, it keeps moving from one place of the tongue to the other, and patient may have mild burning sensation, but generally they are asymptomatic and don't really cause much of concern. But so in some cases they could be associated with fissured tongue. It's important that you get tested these patients for presence of diabetes mellitus. White sponge nevus, it is an autosomal dominant disorder. It's benign and asymptomatic, and generally no treatment is required. But the appearance is the entire buccal mucosa here, for example, you're seeing is extremely thick and white. Leukedema, very common. It's a normal variant. It is a thin veil-like or translucent appearance of generally seen in the buccal mucosa. Now it's more likely that you see it in smokers because of the mild keratinization of the mucosa that's happening, but otherwise it's a normal variant. When you stretch the buccal mucosa, this whitish veil-like appearance disappears. Morsicatio, this is cheek biting. It happens habitually by patient when the patient in stress, under stress, or when the patient is thinking and they're subconsciously worried about something, or just by habitually they end up biting their cheek. You will see that this kind of thickened keratotic areas are seen either on the buccal mucosa or the lips or the tongue. Depends on where the patient is constantly biting the mucosa. The term that we use is morsicatio buccarum when we see it on the cheek, morsicatio linguarum when we see it on the tongue, and generally lateral borders of the tongue, and labiorum when we see it on the lower labial mucosa. Very difficult to bite the upper labial mucosa. It's generally the lower labial mucosa that's involved. Frictional keratosis, I've already spoken about this lesion earlier also. This is induced by chronic trauma to the site. So if you've noticed here, there are no teeth on this ridge here. So obviously the maxillary teeth must be opposing and constantly food in the area. There's constant trauma, minor trauma, leading to an appearance of thickened area, keratotic area on the ridge. Is also called as ridge keratosis, and you would be worried that it may look like leukoplakia or homogeneous leukoplakia. But if there is an obvious reason of chronic trauma, then frictional keratosis should be thought of as a primary diagnosis. Hairy tongue. Now actually if you look at these pictures, they don't even fit into red and white lesions, but initially these lesions can be whitish in color and may take on the color of food products on a long term and give this appearance. Because of the extended filiform papillae, the patient ends up with this sort of appearance.
So that brings us to the end of the discussion about red and white lesions, but what remains is forming treatment algorithms and actually putting yourself in a position in the clinic where you are looking at a case and then trying to formulate a differential diagnosis and come up with a diagnostic workup as well as a treatment algorithm. So we will look at more of this in the upcoming lecture, where we would try to put all that we learned together in all of the previous 3 parts and come up with some interesting treatment algorithms. I hope you have understood this, and if you haven't, please feel free to email me so I could give you more clarification for the doubts that you have. Thank you.